Mr. Freeman, would you like to test your audio?
Testing.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Okay, we're ready.
Okay, Alan, on the record. Good morning. Today is the 7th evidentiary hearing in the Massachusetts Energy Facilities Siting Board in docket EFSB 22-01, Eversource Energy's Certificate of Environmental Impact and Public Interest for the East Eagles Substation. Good morning and welcome, everyone. To start, I want to explain how to use Zoom today to ensure that everyone can fully participate in this public hearing from the start. We have interpreters who will be translating from English to Spanish and Spanish to English. To select your desired language, click on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and select English or Spanish so that you can hear everything said today with interpretation as needed. I will give you a moment so that you can do that. For audio-only participation, attendees can dial in at 646-558-8656, which is not a toll-free number, and then enter the webinar ID 836-9233-7532. Simultaneous English to Spanish and Spanish to English will be provided. Please do not check the box that says mute original audio. We recommend this so you can still hear the voice of the actual speaker faintly in the background, but mostly you will hear the voice of the interpreter. Dial-in participants will hear the speaker's voice without interpretation, as Zoom does not offer interpretation for dial-in participants. However, all comments made by dial-in participants on this number will be interpreted into Spanish or English. I'm going to ask the interpreter to repeat the instructions above in Spanish. Thank you. My name is Donna Sharkey. I'm the presiding officer in this proceeding, and I'm conducting today's 7th day of evidentiary hearings. As part of the bench today are other members of the Siting Board staff. Andrew Green, Director of the Siting Board, Joan Evans, General Counsel, and Wayne Wong, Siting Analyst. Please note that this hearing is being recorded by our stenographer, and video recordings of both the English and Spanish streams will be posted to the Siting Board's YouTube channel for viewing. Please remember our guidelines to use in speaking at this evidentiary hearing. There is a court reporter participating remotely who will transcribe everything said during this hearing. As we are all relying on internet connections or telephones to participate, we could experience some technical problems. Please speak slowly and clearly to allow a speaker to finish speaking before you begin speaking, and to pay attention to the video of the person speaking and my video. I will raise my hand as a sign on my video if I need to interrupt the person currently speaking to ask them to stop. Are there any matters that the parties would like to raise today before we resume with questions for the company's witnesses? Hearing none, we will resume today with the company's witnesses. On any remaining questions on the topics of the compatibility of the proposed substation with environmental protection, public health, and public safety, public interest, convenience, and necessity, and conformity with existing state and local laws, and the reasonableness of exemptions. Mr. Rosenzweig, would you mind introducing or identifying the witnesses that you will be presenting on the panel today?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Sharkey. And as a general matter, I'll go within each topic, although other witnesses from time to time, depending on the question, may provide responses to those questions. On the compatibility issue, the testimony will be offered by Christopher Newhall, and perhaps Mr. Newhall can raise his hand. Mr. Petersile, same, thank you. Mr. Zico, and from time to time, Ms. Engstrom, Ms. Berica, and Ms. Bowden. And again, others may add to that panel's examination depending on scope of questions. On the topic of public interest, convenience, and necessity, the company's witnesses, principal witnesses, will be Mr. Freeman. Ms. Freeman, raise your hand, please. Thank you. Mr. Ludwig, Mr. Martinez, at times Mr. Newhall, who we've already identified, and Mr. Petersile. And then on the issue of conformity with his existing state and local laws, some of the similar witnesses will be testifying: Mr. Freeman, Mr. Ludwig, Mr. Martinez, Mr. Newhall, and perhaps even Mr. Zico on some substation issues. So I hope that helps, and we look forward to today's hearing.
Thank you. And I would just remind all of the witnesses who have just been listed that you've all been previously sworn. Thank you. The bench does not have questions to raise at this point today. So, Ms. Rubin, do you have additional questions for the witnesses?
We do not have additional questions for the witnesses. Thank you.
Mr. O'Brien, do you have additional questions for the witnesses?
Under the topic of public interest, convenience, and necessity, we have a few questions, and also under conformity, we have a few questions.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Yes, so thank you. Good morning, everyone. So residents would like to continue where we left off here from yesterday with consideration of the Attorney General's statement concerning the East Boston proposed East Boston substation under the category of public interest. But before we do that, we do have a few framing general questions. And the first is, does the company operate under a charter issued by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts?
Could you explain your term charter?
Yes, and I genuinely don't know the answer to this, so I would like to find out whether, under what terms of agreement with the Commonwealth does the company operate within its service area? Is there a public service agreement of some sort?
Well, the question is a legal question at its core, and I'm not going to offer legal opinions here, but there's a long history of franchise rights for electric companies, and some of those rights are codified in Chapter 164, as well as regulations that are have been enacted and overseen by the Department of Public Utilities. So it is a matter of statute and regulation. In any event, it would be not matters that these witnesses would be in the right position to describe with any detail.
Yeah, fair enough. I do want to point out, just say for the record that we residents did try to research this, but we couldn't find the information online, which is why we raised the question, but we'll continue to do that. Does the company in its operations within Massachusetts or in Eastern Massachusetts, and particularly within East Boston, is it in any way bound to provide reliable electricity within the service area with minimal impact to the environment and at the least cost? Is that provision part of what the company is obligated to do?
I think again, you're asking for Mr. Rosenzweig to provide a legal statement on behalf of the company. So I'm going to leave it to his discretion as to whether he wants to answer that or not.
Well, I will say, I mean, it is a legal question and it is the essence of what's within the siting board statutory mandate, beginning at section 69H of chapter 164 and carrying forward in other statutory sections such as section 69J, if that helps Mr. O'Brien as a reference, and there's lots of SJC case law. As it relates to the essence of whether this project meets those standards, these witnesses are available to describe their knowledge of and aspects of the project that comply with those standards. But the legal essence of your question in terms of obligations and the source of that authority, I've given the legal answer to that, and I sort of defer to you whether you need more information at this stage.
No, I thank you. I appreciate that answer, and we'll continue to do our research on that. So turning back to picking up the thread from yesterday and looking at the Attorney General's statement in the context of public interest, the residents would like to know if the company is aware that there's a website that was maintained by the proponents of the ballot initiative, which residents could use to ask questions concerning the ballot initiative.
I believe, Mr. O'Brien, that you asked this yesterday and there was some discussion towards the end of the day in the transcript regarding the website related to the ballot initiative. Do you
Yes.
have specific questions regarding?
Yes, I can proceed directly to sort of where we're looking to go with this line of questioning. In the exchange yesterday around this issue, the company's representative basically said that they, and I refer to the transcript, the relevant portion. The company's representative basically said that they acknowledged the statement had been made by the Attorney General, but did not stipulate to its accuracy or completeness, or accuracy strictly. So my question, residents' question now is, would the company agree that East Boston already bears a disproportionate burden of the industrial infrastructure and associated environmental health risks?
I believe the company can't land an opinion on that question. We can talk about the benefits of the substation that we're looking to construct in East Boston and what those benefits will be for that community.
Thank you. Would the company agree that the Attorney General has a duty to represent the public interest?
Mr.
I think that's Mr. Rosenzweig's area again, Mr. O'Brien, in terms of you're asking for a legal opinion on the Attorney General's responsibilities.
Yes. And Mr. O'Brien, I am not trying to obstruct, but these are pretty delicate legal issues, and it's an evidentiary hearing, and I'm not trying to reprimand you or anything like that. But the responsibilities of the Attorney General are established by statute. Certainly, Eversource has no control or say in how the Attorney General chooses to implement his or her statutory authority. So our witnesses are not in a position to comment on any of those issues as to what her statement was and what its import is, and whether that is a legal or relevant consideration for the citing board in this matter. That's something for you to argue on brief, and I welcome you to do so.
Yeah, fair enough. And I appreciate that position. And I just would like to say for the record, these rules of evidence, we very much respect them. We're not trying to go around them in any way. Just it simply comes from not total familiarity. So turning now specifically to, and I'll give the reference from the transcript from yesterday. Actually, no, excuse me, from June the 21st. So the day before yesterday. And this is at page 836, lines 13 through 20. And if people want to take a moment to find that, but I think it'll be familiar. This is a series of questions that Mr. Green asked. He asked a similar or almost the same question to a series of witnesses. And I'll quote the relevant portion. And this is from the discussion with Senator Edwards. And it says, I'd like you to at least begin with the hypothetical that the company's forecast is correct and that there may be potential for outages under the defined conditions in 2024. So my first question, residents' first question, is the company aware of this exchange?
Mr. O'Brien, I believe Mr. Rosenzweig, as well as many of the witnesses here today, were present during the hearing.
Just to confirm that, yes, thank you. So I'd like to, residents would like to take this line of inquiry a little bit further and ask the question in the following way to the company and whomever amongst the company is best equipped to answer it. So this is our question. If the requested certificate is not issued, or if for any other reasonably foreseeable reason, final permits are not issued for the proposed East Eagle substation, and if they're not likely to be received for a reasonable foreseeable period of time in the future, let's just
I'm sorry, if they're not likely to what?
To be received in a reasonably foreseeable time in the future, say 1 year. Would the company at that point prepare measures to ensure continued electrical service reliability to East Boston?
So, Mr. O'Brien, I think when Mr. Hallstrom was testifying, we spoke a little bit about our emergency measures that we would have to implement should a situation occur where there are blackouts in the East Boston, and we can't forget about our partners in Chelsea because you guys are served out of one substation. If there were blackouts in both of those communities. And so we have an obligation to find alternate measures, whether that includes generators or what have you, that we discussed on previous days, but we would have to bring on some kind of intermittent solution to continue to provide temporary power to those communities.
Yes, and that was a very useful discussion to understand what the options are. So this line will be very shortly concluded, and I do have one or two more. So under the stated conditions, which is to say, if the company's evaluation is the permits are not likely to be issued within, let's just say, a year, would the company commitment to continue to provide reliable electrical service to East Boston include evaluation of whether to seek an alternative location for this proposed substation on East Eagle Street?
I think that we've said this before. It is urgent that we get this substation permitted, construct, and in operation fairly soon, as we're coming to capacity constraints in both of these communities. At this time, the company's main objective is to construct and get that substation online. The only alternatives that we may look at include bringing in emergency measures to ensure that there's continuous power to these communities. Our goal here is to permit and construct this substation.
Yes. So with that in mind, can the company envision a point in time in the future, and let's just say within the next 6 months, when the choice for the company is between continuing to seek permitting to allow construction of this substation at this location, or taking into account its commitment to provide reliable electricity, decide that the company and its customers are better served by seeking an alternative location?
Well, I would say the underlying response to that is the fact that the company submitted an application to the siting board under the original, the very first pre-notice project change, the very initial siting request to build a new substation based on the need at that time, years ago. In the need discussions that others have testified during these proceedings, I think it's pellucidly clear that the time has passed from when the company needs to build the substation to ensure reliable energy supply to the customers of East Boston.
I also think your question calls for speculation. You're asking us to speculate what's going to happen 6 months out. What we can tell you right now is that this substation needs to be constructed and put online to continue reliable service to the customers in East Boston and Chelsea.
And
Certainly.
I'll just add to that testimony that the company has sought those approvals for this project that solves this eminent need over the past several years, and has received those approvals, not only from this board, but from local boards to the extent that they've allowed review to move forward, but also the DEP in this matter, and through appeals of those decisions. So we have sought that in good faith with sufficient time to address this need, and the time for alternative site selection is past. It's been evaluated. It has been determined by this board and other regulatory agencies in the state of Massachusetts that this project is an acceptable project that minimizes environmental impacts and satisfies a critical need. And those determinations have been made at this point in time. And for those that have not been allowed to proceed for different reasons, which may or may not be reasonable, we are seeking this override and issuance of the necessary permits from the board.
The only other thing I'll add to Mr. Newhall and what Ms. Bowden stated is that we don't wait for blackouts to occur. We want to reliably serve our customers now and plan accordingly. And that's what we're doing in regards to this petition.
Sure. Before I ask a couple more questions, any other company representative want to weigh in? So to go back to Mr. Green's question, which laid an assertion or a predicate, if you will, like a presupposition to let's just talk to Senator Edwards for the moment, that if it's true, he asked Senator Edwards to accept the hypothetical, as he called it, that the company's forecasts are correct, that isn't it a potential impact that outages would occur? And I think it's a very fair question and a very relevant question. So taking that same frame of reasoning, that is to say, the company is committed to providing reliable service and makes projections, reasonable projections based upon situations as they're given. Can the company, in its diligent efforts to continue to provide reliable service, envision a point in time when the reasonable decision is to no longer seek to build this substation, but to build a substation at an alternative location.
Before the witnesses respond, I have to say that your question again goes to whether there's an alternative location. And I raised this earlier in the proceeding that siting board precedent is clear, and the SJC has affirmed on this issue that matters that have been fully and fairly adjudicated in prior proceedings are not within the proper scope of a certificate proceeding and need not be relitigated. And it would be my contention that your question is at its essence an inquiry as to whether there's an alternative site. And that's not what we're seeking here. We're seeking permits for this site as we have over the last several years. That site has been approved by the siting board. And what you're asking is anathema to what is supposed to be litigated within the scope of the siting board's review here. So I would object to further inquiry and would ask for a ruling from the hearing officer to make clear that further questions on alternative site are not within the proper scope of this proceeding.
I'd just like to respond briefly, if I
Go
may.
ahead, Mr. O'Brien.
Yes, those points are well taken. We're not attempting to introduce the question of alternative sites, just to be clear. And if my question wasn't sufficiently lucid on that point, it's our responsibility to make it so. We're trying to get to the question of public interest and the company's evident commitment, which we're not questioning, to provide reliable service. And that's sort of the crux, I think, of Mr. Green's inquiry, and it's sort of our continuation of that. So just to confirm, we're not looking to introduce specific alternatives. It's sort of more, how does the company weigh its public interest obligations to provide reliable service in the context of an ongoing and perhaps extending proceeding?
I think that these witnesses can address the question, if this is what you're asking, as to why pursuit of this project and satisfying the need that has been identified with the proposed substation is consistent with the public interest. If that's your question, it's a fair question, and I would not object to that.
Yeah, let's try that. And we don't have a lot more questions, but please continue a bit more. Thank you.
To start off, I'll say that when a need is addressed, we design, we evaluate and design a project that'll service that need. We undergo site selection processes. We evaluate different locations. We work with stakeholder groups to identify reasonable sites. The site that we've selected has been adjudicated through past proceedings. It has a minimum of environmental impacts, and it services the project need, which is to provide reliable electric service to the communities that we serve, including East Boston, which, as you note, is an environmental justice community. Not servicing that need would be, to use Mr. Rosenzweig's word, an anathema to environmental justice considerations to ignore that need. And that is what we've proposed and sought approval for over the last several years. There's probably some other witnesses that can sort of back up that statement and provide some additional context, but that is the process that we undergo when we identify a need that is critical to serving our customers.
Yeah, I should probably add, as part of the need panel, that the entire premise of trying to get permits for this property, right, is trying to prevent let's say rolling blackouts, right? So it will not be responsible for the company to wait for the occurrence of let's say, blackouts in order to plan for them. That means that it is a fundamental obligation of the company to serve our customers reliably and safely. That means we have to avoid putting the system at risk of failure instead of waiting for something to happen. So the entire premise of trying to build a substation in the location that is proposed, it is for the reason of expediting the construction and reinforcement of the electric distribution system, so we don't get to a point where our customers have rolling blackouts of unreliable electric service, right? We provide an essential service to our customers, and we can't wait until something happens or until it's too late to reinforce the system. This property, as Mr. Rosenzweig said, has been adjudicated. This is the best property in order for us to do that.
To add to what Mr. Martinez just said, Eversource has a system planning department whose function is to look into the future and plan for future system needs. And that's a long time horizon. As you can imagine, it takes a long time to perform a site selection analysis relevant to site alternatives, possibilities, to serve particular load pockets where there's tremendous load growth. And that process is done in a proactive manner such that these facilities can be sited, permitted, constructed, and put into operation well in advance of any emergent need, which would be a detriment to the customers we seek to serve.
And further, as the director of said system planning department,
I'm sorry, it's the director of said.
as the director of said distribution system planning department at Eversource, I take this obligation extremely seriously. And I don't want to make this personal, but I kind of have to bring a little bit of my background in here. I have done this exercise academically in a prior life. I have done this as a consultant. I have done this where the stakes weren't very high. The reason why I joined Eversource is because I wanted everything I do to mean something. My job at Eversource, I see how it impacts people's lives, how it's important, how it relates to the real world. And so when we do this exercise, it's not academic. We're not postulating that, when we do this, we're doing things in a vacuum. We understand that there are real people at stake, real economic consequences, real health and safety consequences. And when we are looking into the future and understanding and trusting in our forecast, and we are saying that this station is needed for reliability, this station is needed for health and safety, this station is needed to allow the residents of East Boston to participate in the green economy, to be able to have better air quality due to the ability to participate in electrification benefits. It's something that resonates with me personally. And to the extent that there is something else that we can do, believe me, we are looking at every possible avenue. And we have come to the point and the place where this solution, this station, is required for the community. And in the event that we cannot build a station in time, as prior witnesses have said, we will do everything in our power to ensure that power continues to flow to the residents of East Boston. We will move everything that we can move. We will put generators out there. We'll make every distribution connection that we can. But understand that everything we do is Band-Aid and rubber band and duct tape, right? It's a mitigation measure. The long-term solution for this area, for the safety, the well-being, the economic efficacy of the residents of East Boston and Chelsea is this substation. There is no way around it. this is where we are, and this is a choice before us.
And I'll just add to what Mr. Freeman said, and the perspective that I'm coming from is a 38-year veteran in the utility business. I have been through many events, despite everybody's best efforts and the company's best efforts. Events can and do happen when our customers are without power, and each time it happens and I'm called upon to help get that power back on, I jump into action and get things on. The bottom line here is that everybody at Eversource takes the job that they do seriously, whether it be and we want to be proactive so that we avoid having to react.
Yes, any other company representatives? I don't want to interrupt. I mean, much of what has been said is very eloquent, and we take it seriously as well. I would like just for a second to pause. Residents have one question on the issue of conformity with laws. I don't know whether we would go to that next or in a separate colloquy, or should I just include it at the end?
I believe, Mr. O'Brien, that you are the only intervener with question who's expressed an interest in asking questions. So I would not necessarily feel constrained in terms of the time it takes to ask those questions.
It's fine. Yes, thank you. That's helpful. So we'll get to that a bit later, not much later, but a bit later. It's as I said, just one question. So in light of what's just been said, and again, much of it resonates with residents, and bearing in mind the general commitment, not specific to East Boston, but the general commitment of the company to contingency planning and evaluating future needs and addressing questions like the green economy, all of that taken together, is it the company's position that an alternative site for this substation is not something that that the company is considering as a contingency plan?
There is no viable alternative site.
I guess at this point, I'll refer back to a CLF question, and I'm not going to quote it exactly, but it's something essentially is the company then presenting the alternative of the choice of this substation or no substation in East Boston at all? And those are residents' words. I don't mean to attribute them to CLF.
Well, I'll answer it because it relates to our petition, which is we're asking for a certificate from the siting board for this project at this site, inclusive of all remaining permits and licenses and approvals that are required, and asking the siting board to grant us authority that it has under its statute, particularly Chapter 164, Section 69K, and some following sections, to grant us relief so that we're in a position of having obtained all of our permits and to allow construction to proceed. We're not pursuing an alternative site. This proceeding is not considering alternative sites or alternative projects. It is simply the project we have described and has been previously approved by the siting board at this site, and asking the siting board to grant those remaining permits so that we can commence construction. That is, as a legal matter, what we have posed to the siting board, and for which you as a party and other parties can present evidence and oppose or support as within your discretion.
Yes, we don't disagree with that statement, and I think that is a fair framing. So this does turning now to the question of the consistency question of conformity with laws. In its application, the company, and this is at page 4 of 32 of the application, and it's been stated in a couple of other contexts as well, that referring to East Boston as an electrical island. And in that context, one of the previous panels talked about the Martha's Vineyard reliability and 91 cable replacement project, and would like to make a record request that the company provide information, and I'll describe specifically about what we're looking for on the Martha's Vineyard reliability and 91 cable replacement project, and specifically a map or diagram showing the relationship between the Oaks Bluff cable landing to the Eversource site on Eastville Avenue, and also on the Falmouth side.
I'm sorry, on what avenue?
Eastville.
Thank you.
Yeah, Eastville Avenue, and then on the land side from the Surf Drive parking lot to the Falmouth substation.
I'm sorry, from the Surf Drive?
The Surf Drive parking lot
Thank you.
to the Falmouth substation.
Mr. O'Brien, you mentioned something about the 91 project. I wasn't clear on what that reference was.
If I read it correctly, and this is from the company's website, Martha's Vineyard reliability and 91 cable replacement project.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about chapter 91 there in some way, that it was unclear to me. So you're looking for a map, or are you looking for a description of the point A to point B aspects of that project?
Yeah, I'll give a brief narrative. So when one goes to the company's page and looks at this reference Martha's Vineyard, et cetera, project, there's two graphics. They're actually very clear, that shows in a schematic format, the relationship between the cable landing and the substation, the Falmouth one, and then the proposed new one in Martha's Vineyard. Simply taking that exhibit and show linear distance from those locations.
Does the company understand what he's asking for?
Mr. O'Brien, I believe those distances are on the company's website that you're referring to, the project website.
Yes, and Mr. Wang made a very interesting observation that a URL is not evidence in the record, and we'd like to get this into the record. So that's the basis of our request.
Could you explain what the relevance is of service to Martha's Vineyard to this certificate proceeding?
Yeah, certainly, and it goes under the notion of the conformity and the question of the Chapter 91 licensing. And it was discussed yesterday, or when the DEP witness, Ms. Hops, was before the panel. And the question is it necessary or required that this ancillary use be located in relationship to the cable crossing? And it illustrates that point, and we believe it's highly relevant to this.
Yeah, I'm not seeing the connection there, to use a phrase. Between the Chapter 91 draft license issued for this project and whatever Chapter 91 licensing is required for the Martha's Vineyard crossing.
I would defer to the hearing officer. I can address that, or however this is appropriately resolved.
I believe, since what Mr. O'Brien is asking for is essentially for the company to provide information that is publicly available on the website, but that he wants to provide as part of the record, to provide that information, and then to the extent he intends to use that in his legal argument, he will have the opportunity to establish the relevance of that in his briefing to the siting board, and the company will have the opportunity to address arguments regarding its relevance in the briefing to the siting board. So in terms of getting that piece of public information, I'm going to allow his record request, which is, as I understand it, just for the company to state the distances for the points on the map that's provided on the company's website. And that would be record request BRG-2, I believe.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, so with that, residents have no further questions, and as before, we thank the company and its representatives for the thoughtful answers.
Ms. Sharkey, I wonder if we could just take a brief recess for a moment?
Sure, why don't we take a break until 11?
Thank you.
Off the record. Why don't we go back on the record? I believe that Mr. Green has some questions for the witnesses.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Sharkey. Are we ready to go?
I believe everyone's back and Alan stands at the ready.
Okay, good morning, panel. I have a few questions regarding MIPA and its relevance to this proceeding. These may perhaps stray into the area of legal questions, and if so, I'm happy to pose them as record requests and wait for a written response, but let's see how far we can get. So first question is, has this project ever been required to submit an ENF, environmental notification form, to MIPA? And when I say ever, I mean in either of the underlying cases or in the certificate phase of this proceeding?
No. Did that audio come through? I answered no.
It
Yes.
did, thank you.
Thank you. So there was no environmental notification form submitted along with the filing of this certificate request. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. We've talked a bit about the Climate Roadmap Act and its effect on MIPA and MIPA protocols. And with that background, I'd like to know if there is anything in the Climate Roadmap Act that would make the project and the certificate filing in particular subject to MIPA ENF or EIR filing requirements if this project were being filed in the first instance.
The answer to that is no.
Can you elaborate on the reasoning for that?
I can. So under the current Roadmap Act and its MIPA's requirements related to the Roadmap Act, projects that otherwise need to go through MIPA review through the filing of an environmental notification form would also be required to file an EIR, which is an environmental impact report, in the instance that those projects are located within specified distances of environmental justice populations. And those distances are 1 mile for any project that has to submit an ENF, or 5 miles for any project that has to submit an ENF and surpasses any air quality thresholds specified under the MIPA regulations.
So are you saying that because this project, as you answered previously, was not required to file an ENF, it did not become subject to those expanded boundaries for the EJ purposes?
Correct. The MIPA regulatory thresholds are established to conduct reviews on projects that are likely, based on just their characteristics, to have an impact to the environment. The proposed project did not surpass any of those thresholds such that it had that presumption of an adverse impact to the environment.
So I'd like to refer you to the board's final decision on the project change at pages 83 and 84 in the footnote 86. And I can read that footnote, it's brief, into the record. The company stated that Mass DEP determined that the substation at the new site, similar to its location at the original site, would constitute a water-dependent use. There's a long string citation. And it continues, in the original proceeding, the company indicated that the water-dependent determination by Mass DEP was a key factor in the project not being required to file an ENF or undergo further MEPA review. Is that statement still factually correct as of today?
Yes, I believe it is. The water dependent use determination is key because MEPA review would have been required for any project for which a Chapter 91 license is required that is not a water dependent use.
And just for clarity, I want to ask whether the fact that the company has not submitted an ENF to MEPA in the context of the certificate proceeding is based in any way on notions of grandfathering or permit timing. Is that a factor in the absence of MEPA?
I don't believe it is. As was previously stated, the project as proposed does not require review under the current MEPA regulations as they specify review thresholds.
Okay, thank you. I think that answers my questions.
Does anyone else have questions for the company's witnesses? Seeing none. Mr. Rosenzweig, would you like the opportunity to do some redirect today?
Yes, very brief, and I'm doing this on the assumption that examination of this panel or these panels has been completed. So I'm going to kind of go back to some issues that arose on other days, and just have an opportunity to get clarification on a couple of points. Thank you.
Do you need a break before doing so?
No, we don't. This should only take a couple of minutes.
That's fine. I'm just asking if you wanted the opportunity.
Oh, thank you. No, we're good to go. Witness panel, particularly the need witnesses. Do you recall testimony and questions from a prior day where the issue was raised in certain questions from some of the cross-examination about whether the company has experienced any rolling blackouts in this load pocket, Chelsea in East Boston, whether that area has been subject to rolling blackouts in recent years? Do you recall that earlier questioning?
Yes.
Yes.
My question to you is, does the absence of rolling blackouts say anything with respect to the need for this facility?
No, the absence of rolling blackouts really do not impact the need assessment for the facility, or does not really tell us anything about what would happen in the future. It would be, and as Mr. Martinez stated earlier, it would be really irresponsible for the company to wait until rolling blackouts have occurred to begin planning for rolling blackouts. The company has a fiduciary obligation to understand the level of service required from its customers and to do prudent planning to ensure that that level of service is provided under all foreseeable circumstances. And so the company has proactively developed a plan that has been presented and discussed. And the plan would ensure continued service over the planning horizon of the next 10 years and in the foreseeable future with regard to load growth and electrification. If this plan is not enacted, if we do not do this, as we've said, and I'm sorry for coming off a little bit passionate about this, we'll be exposing the residents of East Boston to a subpar system that they do not deserve. There would be second-class citizens with respect to reliable service, and the equipment would be at risk for failure, which, as we know, could exacerbate the occurrence of rolling blackouts. The company will do everything within its power, as I mentioned before, to make sure that this doesn't happen. But make no mistake, without this project, without this solution, we will have the occurrence of rolling blackouts. And if it hasn't happened in the past, that is no indication that it won't happen. In fact, to the contrary, if we understand statistics and we know that something is likely to occur, if it hasn't occurred before, there's a higher likelihood that it will occur in the future. It's just a matter of time.
I should probably expand on the equipment part of it. So the company follows very well-known and established utility practice to proactively plan for contingencies and avoid putting the system at risk of failure instead of waiting for the system to fail in order to take action. This means we try to avoid, by all means, operating critical assets like substation transformers above their normal or emergency limits, because this can result in serious damage to the equipment. It could decrease the useful life of the equipment, and it could cause even more serious long-term reliability issues to the system. And this is an event that it simply cannot be allowed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman and Mr. Martinez. One further question. There were some examination, I guess it was last week, about how feeders serve Logan Airport from Chelsea substation. Do you recall that general line of examination?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm wondering whether you can go into a little more detail about how that service is accomplished and whether those feeders are dedicated to Logan Airport or serve multiple purposes, that is, multiple customers, in providing reliable electric service throughout East Boston.
So I can probably expand on that. So the supply to Logan Airport is a combination of both kind of designs. It's a combination of feeders that go directly to the Massport property, and it's also a combination of feeders that go to Massport property, but also supply Chelsea and East Boston customers along the way. There's also feeders that just come out of Chelsea and supply areas of East Boston by themselves, right? So once the proposed substation is constructed, there will be additional feeders that will come out of the new station to basically serve all customers. So the plan is to tie to feeders that supply all customers, including Massport, right? And then create a more robust design for all customers of East Boston. It actually bears repeating that the need for the proposed substation is not driven solely by Massport needs, right? The need is because there's an imminent capacity limitation at the source substation, which is Chelsea substation, which is close to its emergency capacity, which is the station that supplies all the load at East Boston and Chelsea, not just specific customers. So we will be deloading with the proposed substation, the Chelsea substation, and we will be designing the system in a way that provides more reliability to all East Boston customers.
And just a quick note to augment Mr. Martinez's excellent response. In the question, Mr. Rosenzweig used the term dedicated, and that's a term that we actually try to avoid. And it was the feeders that go directly to large customers. We prefer to call them express feeders, specifically for the fact that these feeders tend to supply other customers along the way as well. And they're not simply dedicated to that customer. They could be used to address growing load in the area along the way to that large customer. It is actually not an uncommon occurrence on our system that we have express feeders going to large customers and feeders also serving other load along the way. And that puts the large customer and the other customers who are served at risk of reliability issues for any events on the feeder or any events on the substation supplying those feeders. So hope that helps. Thanks.
Thank you, gentlemen. No further redirect.
I do have one follow-up question, if I may.
Mr. Green?
Thank you. With regard to Logan Airport, I'm not sure the record reflects to any degree of precision what role they play in peak day loads in the East Boston area. I know that the particular load profile for the Logan Airport Massport facility is I believe protected or has been redacted, but can we get some general proportional term or reference in terms of how significant the Massport facility is to either East Boston as a load area or the Chelsea East Boston area served by the Chelsea substation? Is that something that we can have on the record, the public record?
I do believe we had some numbers related to that, Mr. Green. I could try finding them now. Let me get a second. If not, then we can proceed with the record request. But just give me a few minutes because I might be able to find something on it.
And while Mr. Martinez is looking, Mr. Green, there is a response that provides load profiles for both Logan and East Boston in total. The portion that relates to an individual customer, we sought and obtained protective treatment on, as well as sort of a mathematical calculation of what it was roughly as a percentage, that is Logan's load as a percentage of East Boston. If that's the data point you're looking for, it is in the record, but it is not in the public record.
Okay. I guess I was looking for the company's willingness to have the Logan as a percent of East Boston peak be in the public record without necessarily saying anything further than that.
I understand your desire for that. And the reason why we do this is it's not Logan specific, actually. It's we attempt to keep all individual customer loads protected. It's one of the company's internal standards so that we don't disclose proprietary information with regard to any individual customer and their usage patterns. and do so only when asked under confidential terms. If the matter is essential to you, Mr. Green, I'd suggest that you ask as a record request, and then we can consider internally whether we're in a position to address that with particular information on the public record.
I appreciate that invitation, which I will take up. So let me formulate this as a record request then. Would the company please provide the percentage of East Boston peak day load that is attributable to the Massport Logan facility over the 2022 forecast period? And can that information be provided for the public record? I am aware we have it in the protected record, but I'd like to see if that level of information is problematic for public disclosure.
We understand the rec request, and the reason why I was proposing that approach is the decision will be made by others that are not on the call as to whether an appropriate exception can be made, or whether we're sort of duty bound to maintain the position that we have taken so far.
Okay, yeah, that works for me. Maybe I have just a sort of rough way of asking the question that may or may not trigger these kinds of concerns. Let me put it this way. Is it fair to say that the load at Logan Airport with regard to the East Boston peak day load forecast is the elephant in the room?
Could I just ask? I understand everybody has a different perception of what the phrase elephant in the room might mean. I would not object and might suggest you ask the question as it is whether it is a large portion of the East Boston load, or even a large portion of the load served out of Chelsea substation. That would be a fair question.
Okay, I think I could rephrase it in the way you just mentioned and see what the witnesses have to say.
And I would just direct the witnesses, they can answer it qualitatively and not quantitatively, and that we would still be within the realm of information that would be appropriate for the public record.
Yes, it is fair to say that the Logan load is a large portion of the East Boston load, and the single largest component of the East Boston load.
That's even more precise than the question I had previously asked. Thank you.
And in light of that response, Mr. Green, do you want to maintain the record requests that you were phrasing?
I would like to retain the record request. I can see its benefit and clarity in writing the decision if it's possible.
In that case, the record request that Mr. Green had posed just before the latest exchange would be record request EFSB 26.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Does anyone else have any follow-up to the company's redirect or anything else that was addressed today?
DLF and Green Roots do not. Thank you.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes, thank you. We have no further questions at this time.
Mr. Hopper?
Is Mr. Hopper here?
He is still on the call. However, he would have the opportunity if he is unavailable at the moment, I suppose, to raise the issue at Monday's hearings. On Monday, we are going to have a panel offered by CLF and Green Roots. And I'm not sure if we've addressed the issue with Mr. O'Brien as to whether he has a desire to present his witness who has otherwise been unavailable to testify at the hearings to date.
Yes, thank you. I don't know whether Gail Miller can speak to that, or if she's been in direct contact with Ms. Del Rio. If Gail is here, she can speak to that. If not, I can give a second-hand update. So
pending anything that Mr. O'Brien or Ms. Miller want to add, I have a suggestion, and it's really as an accommodation to Boston Residents Group, but all parties. We would not oppose, if other parties would not oppose, that Ms. Del Rio's testimony be allowed to go into the record as is without further examination, and sort of forego the scheduling issue that may arise with respect to her appearing. My understanding from other parties, but I will only speak for ourselves, is that essentially the plan and expectation is that other parties did not see or didn't express an intent to do any detailed examination of it. So if that would be okay with the Boston Residents Group, Mr. O'Brien, it would be a convenience to Ms. Del Rio, and I'll allow her testimony to come in as is.
that'll be much appreciated. She just has a new job and it's very hard for her to break away. So if the group is okay with it, we certainly would appreciate that accommodation.
And we certainly do not have any objections to that.
And I believe, based on our discussions yesterday, that it was accurate that none of the parties had questions to ask Ms. Del Rio, so that would be acceptable to the board. Thank you, Mr. Rosenzweig, for proposing the resolution for that issue.
Yes, thank you.
In that case, is there anything else before we close today and resume on Monday?
Ms. Sharkey, I think you stated that the Green Roots panel would be up on Monday. I believe Mr. Chi is also scheduled for Monday. Is that correct?
Yes, I was actually going to raise that, Ms. Evans. Yes, so it's actually two panels. So we will have Brian Chi on his own panel, and then a panel of witnesses that include Roseanne Bongiovanni, John Walkie, and Sandra Alaman-Niger.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that.
You are welcome. And Attorney Phelps Turner will be leading our direct examination on Monday.
Thank you. In that case, absent anything else, we will close for today and we will resume on Monday. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Off
you.
the record.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great weekend.
Thank you.